Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving, where we're putting human back in human capital solutions. On today's episode, we're going to hear from an industry leader where they're sharing their thoughts, feedback, and perspective on what's happening in today's world of work. Well, let's stay tuned and perk our ears up for another exciting episode.
Welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving. Darren, I don't know about you, man. 2026 is off to a rockin' start. We're really excited about what we're seeing across the industry, but also some of the great guests that we have lined up for our audience this year already. It's just going to be an incredible year. Really looking forward to it. Today's guest is right at the top of that list. So I'm really excited to introduce our audience to one of the best leaders in her space, but also an incredible example of someone who has really built an incredible career across multiple organizations, small and big, and has a lot of great wisdom to bestow to us today, Darren. So I'm really excited. But before I introduce her, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
No, I say no, but yes, I do actually. So, I enjoyed the first meeting that we had with Abby, Sean. There was a high level of authenticity and earnestness, and I know that's how she's led within the organization we're going to talk about that she's been a part of. I get the sense that she is a servant leader. So I'm looking forward to uncovering quite a bit. And whenever we have a clinical operations leader, that's near and dear to my heart, since Mike, who we've had on the podcast, is also a leader in clinical operations with over 20 years of experience. She doesn't want me to tell the audience exactly how many years she has, but ClinOps is near and dear to my heart. So can't really wait to learn more about Abby's career.
Perfect. Well, why don't I give her a formal introduction so that we can let our audience know who today's guest is. Abby Kennedy is a seasoned clinical operations leader. She has over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry and currently serves as the Vice President of Clinical Operations at Jasper Therapeutics in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a clinical stage biotech company. And she leads clinical operations, data management, and biostats for their pipeline aimed at alleviating mast cell-mediated diseases and brings deep expertise in translating the complex science into really successful clinical execution, which is no small task, by the way. Before her current role, she actually built a really strong track record across clinical operations at a range of biotech companies, including leadership roles where she oversaw international program execution, collaborated across cross-functional teams, and helped to really bring new therapies forward for patients. She's known for her thoughtful leadership, commitment to strong partnerships, and the ability to inspire her teams to deliver both quality and impact. So on today's episode, we're going to explore some of her journey through clinical operations, a lot of the great insights she has on building high-performance teams, and her perspective on what it takes to really thrive in the complex drug development environments in 2026. So welcome, Abby Kennedy. We're so glad to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, Sean. That was a lovely bio. I really appreciate that. Darren, good to see you in person over Zoom here. I really appreciate your time today. This is a great topic. Developing other people is something that I really care a lot about, and communicating with other people effectively is something I care about. So this should be great.
Well, awesome. We're so glad to have you. And I know, Darren, to echo your sentiments, Abby and I got to meet for the first time, or at least I got to listen to her share at a great conference in the Bay Area last year and was thinking to myself, the minute that I walked out of that session, we need to reach out to Abby and have her as a guest on the podcast. And so here we are. This is great to have that fulfilled.
Yeah, this is a first. A podcast for me is a first, and I'm so excited to tell my teenage daughters I'm on a podcast. So we'll have to make sure this makes it into their YouTube thread.
There you go. I love it.
We'll make sure it does. Well, let's jump into it, Abby. As we were preparing for our conversation today, there was many areas that we could questions and learn from you. But we wanted to kick things off by really asking you if you would be able to share with our audience a time when you dealt with a particularly challenging colleague or stakeholder, and what specific approaches helped you turn that interaction around?
This is a fascinating question to me. I mean, for the most part, most people that I've worked with in the drug development industry have been genuine, warm, caring, lovely individuals. But regardless, there are always some challenging interactions. And in particular, when you asked this question, a few came to mind. And in fact, I'm going to plug a book pretty early in the podcast. So much challenging conversation that I actually bought a book called Getting Along by Amy Gallo. And I've given a few talks based on this excellent book of hers. In fact, one talk I gave was called Dealing with Difficult People. So all that to say, I definitely have specific examples of challenging interactions that I've had in the workspace. And this book has gone a long way. You can see it's pretty dog-eared and highlighted. But just to share one example with the podcast listeners. So yeah, one in particular comes to mind. One challenging individual that I had several challenging interactions with. I'll just describe the scenario of one time we were in a Zoom meeting together, and it was a group setting, so there were maybe 8 people on the call, and I could just tell that I was losing this person. They seemed frustrated with me, so sort of answering very quickly, cut me off a few times. So my spidey sense was that something was off. And I had had some, challenging interactions with this person previously. So I did one of my favorite things to do. One of my strategies is in public, taking the high road. So I didn't call this person out in the meeting. I didn't complain that they were interrupting me in the meeting, but I waited until after we got off the call. And then I went to address this situation one-on-one. So I called this person up after the call, and I just started, generally trying to get this person to talk about what was going on. And I said, I felt like our interaction was just a little off in that meeting. Is there something I said? What happened during that meeting? And this person just replied, "Oh, Abby, you just seemed disgusted in that meeting." And honestly, I was shocked. I don't think I've ever been disgusted in a Zoom meeting for work in 25 years. Like, that's a pretty strong emotional word to use to describe someone's facial features. So number one was, okay, now I have to be careful what, facial expressions I'm making on Zoom, which can be a challenge. But number two, what led this person to think that? And so the good thing about calling them up and having that explicit conversation was I got to dig a little bit, and I was able to reassure them that no, I was not disgusted with their opinion or their ideas. In fact, maybe that was just my facial expression, but we were able to smooth over that situation. So I think my advice along these lines is when you have those challenging interactions, especially if it's a peer or an executive leader, try as much as possible to take the high road if you have a public audience around you, but then make sure that you follow up and have that one-on-one tougher conversation. Sometimes we joke like I had to put my big girl panties on and have the hard conversation afterwards for why this person felt off in a meeting. We can continue to have further difficult interactions during my time working with this person, but we were usually able to have one-on-one conversations to talk through the challenges.
Yeah, that's great. I love what you said, Abby, too. I don't even know if you intended to say it, but it flagged something for me. You were talking about calling them up to actually probably reach out to them about the discussion, but it also shows your leadership that you didn't call them out, you called them up by having an individual conversation and letting them know what the standard looks like. And I think that's a great model because I agree with you. In public is always better to, have those conversations in one-on-one scenarios. It's never going to end well if you are publicly working that out in front of people. I can tell you that much.
Yeah. And it's not a good look, especially if you have direct reports in the room or other key stakeholders to be, escalating challenges publicly.
Yeah. Well, this is great. Actually, we're talking about with other stakeholders and you're really coaching people through. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of some of our audience who may be newer to people management or newer to having that higher level of responsibility with report twos. How would you coach some of those emerging leaders to really maintain empathy and professionalism while still holding those people on their team accountable? Because I find it sometimes hard as a leader when you want to hold people to accountable at your level. It can become difficult to maintain that empathy and other things. So how would you coach someone into that space?
Yeah, it goes back to the example that I just gave where I tried to just have this challenging individual start talking, right? So one thing I like to tell my direct reports and my team members is, if you're having trouble understanding somebody or there's challenges, sometimes be curious, not furious. So ask them
Good.
questions, get them
Wow.
talking, understanding what's going on. I remember when I was at a different company where we had somebody that was just underperforming repeatedly. But it turns out they were having major issues at home and health issues of their
Hmm.
spouse. And so we wouldn't have found that out if we hadn't have had that open conversation and been curious. When it comes to leading my direct reports along this line, I will say I have seen this on several occasions, and I think there's a certain archetype of person that it pops up with, and that can be the really driven leader, the
Mhm.
person that is driving the project forward, that's, owning the timelines, just really a go-getter, someone that is really assertive when it comes to the work and leading projects, which overall that's a great attribute to have, especially director level, senior director. But one of the challenges can be they might not like it if other people on the team are underperforming.
Hmm.
And so one thing there's, that African proverb, if you want to, I think it's if you want to go far, go by yourself, or if I'm misquoting it, but basically if you want to accomplish a lot, you have to bring other people with you. And I think getting these drivers to think about bringing their team with them, that they're not going to go and do this work by themselves, can help them remember they have to have the empathy to bring the team with them, understanding what's going on with that team dynamic, and making sure that they're getting the best work out of everyone on the team.
Well, I'm thinking about times where, Abby, I should have been curious rather than furious. And I think that is such a good lesson, no
Yes.
matter what stage of leadership you're currently in. Speaking of curiosity, I think it's just a tremendous leadership quality. Curiosity, for me, conveys engagement. It conveys that you genuinely care about someone. Um, as you reflect back on your career, are there things that a professional relationship has become toxic, perhaps counterproductive? And what next steps, should someone take before really getting to that point?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can see see it developing in the moment, and sometimes you don't really notice it if it's little interactions along the way, and then all of a sudden you think back and you think, yeah, this is really taking a bad turn. So it is a bit of a luxury to see it escalating as it goes, as opposed to, all these little signs that you didn't put together, to know that you need to, do something about it. I do have one example where we were able to see some early signs that a relationship was going the wrong direction. I say we because it was myself and a leader of a very critical function that I work with. So we were two VP level colleagues, and we started to notice issues bubbling up from our study teams as well as the director level. So a lot of similar issues were being escalated on both sides to this other peer of mine as well as to me. And then over the course of maybe a few months, we started to notice a trend in the
Hmm.
escalations. And so there was no major falling out, there were no screaming matches, but there were enough escalations to us that we knew, okay, we needed a reset in this relationship. So that's exactly what we did is we put together a very thoughtful reset, which included some bonding, like, sort of squishy bonding activities where we just planned an offsite where we, had food together. We did an activity that wasn't related to work. It was a craft activity in hopes of helping our teams be a little bit closer together, be empathetic towards each other, and, just develop a closer bond so that they could work more effectively together. I would say that worked to a certain extent, but that's, not going to fix all of the technical challenges the team might be having. And in this particular instance, we actually had to take another step, which is where we developed working agreements together.
Hmm.
And this was separate from any corporate goals or, corporate ethos. This was actual working agreements between my department and the second department. And it was basically a set of 3 or 4 pretty high level rules, including things like assume positive intent, um, talk on the phone instead of over email. It was really basic communication rules. But what helped about putting these working agreements in place was that then when the team felt that the behavior was not being followed, they could point to the working agreement and
Hmm.
say, hey, remember, we agreed we were going to
Wow.
discuss this in person and we weren't going to have, 10 email strings all together complaining about a technical issue. So Yeah, it was basically level setting the expectations for communicating between the two groups. But that was where, there's one instance where we could see little things bubbling up and we tried our best to, to head that off.
Well, I love what you said about the twofold approach. I think empathy is a lost art. I think in the workplace sometimes where we lose the human element when we get so focused, especially those that are operational like us, Abby, who love to drive KPIs, we love to drive spreadsheets, and we love to drive those things. But I think what I love about the twofold approach is that you didn't stay there though. You started with the empathy piece. You started with let's connect with each other as humans, but then you also set some groundwork in place to be able to work forward in agreement to be able to rebuild what's already been broken down a little bit. I think it's such a great combination of two things together to be able to work your way forward out of that potential toxic relationship. So,
Something that was sort of implied that I didn't really spell out, but the implication is when you're having challenges with another group, you actually, the fight or flight instinct takes over and you just want to avoid people. But really, in my experience, the solution is to get closer, get tighter, meet with that person more often, whether it's a team or one individual person, is to keep your enemies close. Not that anyone's really an enemy, but keep the people that you're having
yeah,
challenges with close has always worked much better for me than just trying to avoid talking to somebody because they're a challenge to you.
wow, that's really good. All right, well, I'm going to pivot a little bit out of the element of working together with other people. I have some questions for you about some of the work you've done over the years on a leadership level within clinical operations. So what we found is that a lot of companies that we work with, but a lot of emerging companies struggle with the age-old debate of build versus buy when it comes to talent. Do you want to bring someone in and make them a part of the team? Do you want to have more flexible resourcing? How do you think about the strategic value of like contractors versus full-time hires, especially when you're in the more unpredictable development phases, and especially given the environment we're in from an investment standpoint, where it seems like a lot of investors have pivoted into the show me data and I'll show you investment rather than the other way around where we saw it for many years. How do you balance that when you're thinking about growing an emerging company?
Yeah, this is such a relevant question for Jasper at the moment because we're a pretty small company. We're 22 FTEs at the moment, heading into a late stage phase 2 program. And so we will need to grow in some way. So this is a great, really timely question, Sean. I think just naturally, a lot of leaders, we our natural instinct would be to go towards a build type of structure where we're hiring FTEs and we're developing them internally. And I think part of that comes from, we want to be leaders, I think many of us, because we like developing people and career development. And sometimes you get a little bit of less of that when you're using an FSP or have heavy on the contractor side. So I think my general goal would be always to build where possible. But as you pointed out, the flux in small biotech and small pharma is so great that that's usually not possible, and usually headcount is constrained, right? That we may be able to bring on, 10 contractors and only have 5 FTEs because the board has just said, no, you're maxing your headcount out, no more headcount, right? So of course, I've over the years relied very heavily on a contractor workforce in two main ways, either, this sort of traditional consulting 1099 contractor, or I think what I'm seeing recently, we're very heavy on what I would call like a staff augmentation type of contractor situation where you're working through a staffing agency that's, has that contractor as a W-2, and then I'm in contract with a staffing agency. And so all the major CROs offer this model, it's their staff augmentation model. They also offer the separate sort of FSP model where they're also overseeing the work of their own employees. So in small firm, I think the model that I've used the most recently is the staff augmentation through a small staffing agency where they're hiring the W-2 contractor, but they're working on my team and they're embedded on my team. I do like that model because it's a nice balance of being able to really truly embed them. It's not the same type of risk as a 1099 contractor where you're hands off in terms of management. these are contractors that I can truly treat like part of the team. They're attending my staff meeting, they're following my working agreements, they're communicating in the way that I've asked them to communicate. So I would say that's probably the one that I've used the most recently. And it can be really effective when you have small teams. And it's something I've relied upon a lot.
Thank you, Abby. You know, as Sean mentioned, depending on where you're at in development, it sounds like there's a lot of solutions out there that can be utilized and even optimized. Again, depending upon what that landscape looks like. Um, if we can continue down that path, but pivot just a little bit, by using those different models that you just shared with us, in your experience, Abby, what operational or even cultural challenges should leaders anticipate when integrating contractors into core teams? And how can they both best really be set up to work in alignment with FTEs? In other words, how have you seen that partnership really thrive when you're utilizing contractors and full-time staff, and how you set them up for success?
Yeah, I think there's just the real basic humanity level, which is treating everyone that works for you with respect, whether there's an FTE or a contractor. I think it's in the type of work that you give the various roles. Like when I've worked in some larger companies, like maybe the juiciest roles were given to the FTEs and the leftover work was given to the contractors. And some contractors are fine with that. They just want to go in, do their job, and they don't want the strategic work. They don't want the challenges. But really, to engage a lot of contractors, they want to be challenged and interested with work. So I think it's a balance of giving the right level of work, especially to the contractors, and then including them. There's some limitations to how much you can develop them. But so, for example, at one of my companies, I started what I called a journal club, and it was once a month, and we would invite everyone in my department. Somebody would present a journal article about some recent clinical trial innovation, and then we would discuss it. So I think I could have easily said, oh, I don't want my contractor to spend an hour on this journal club discussion. But really, contractors have a lot of value that they're bringing. Usually they're very experienced, so they have a lot of knowledge. And so I basically told the contractors, look, if your study allows it and you have time, you don't have a conflict, please come to Journal Club. Please contribute to the conversation. It's worth that hour of pay to me to have your input on a topic that's not just your day-to-day study job. So I think there's little things like that that you can do to show them that they're valued and not just an afterthought when it comes to your clinical operations team.
I love that. Having been in this industry for quite some time, I can tell you that that is not common. That is rather uncommon. We've supported a plethora of organizations where that workforce is completely segregated in some respects, right? And we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the podcast, but our ethos, our mantra, our battle cry, if you will, here at Thorough Group is work as one, win as one. And that does not mean that just because you have a different title, you're not part of the team, right? So at the end of the day, we have a mission to advance global health and do our part to get our programs through development, ultimately to commercialization. So utilized for many different therapeutic areas. So I really, really value and appreciate that perspective because I'll say it again, it is uncommon. So I'm sure the productivity, that's a byproduct, but I'm sure the productivity, the engagement, the culture was extremely high across contractor or not.
And not only that, but then you have contractors that want to work with you. I've had contractors that have followed me to multiple companies because they've enjoyed the work they're doing. They felt like a valued colleague. So it is about those relationships and helping them to feel valued.
It goes all the way back to what we talk about regularly, Abby, that people don't quit jobs, or companies, they quit leaders. And that even happens on the contract side. People want to follow, they don't mind, they're not as married, sometimes they are, but they're not as married to the therapeutic area or the indication or the phase of work or whatever. They're more interested in following Abby or whoever the leader is who they've worked under different organizations, and they understand that the work is the work. They're working towards the global health initiatives. They're working towards getting medicines to patients in need. They're working towards seeing, essentially like medical miracles in front of them. I think that's really what they're focused into, but they could do that 100 places. But man, if they can follow a great leader who is someone who values them and, keeps them truly a part of the team, I think that makes a huge difference. And ultimately, that's why they do follow. I find that happens a lot with contractors that will, follow leaders from company to company as they go, because they do feel seen. They feel, important and valued, even though they are a part of more of a contingent workforce, so to speak, more of a staff aug or whatever the language you want to use. They don't feel that way. They feel like they're truly a part of the team. And those are the organizations we see that really find the greatest level of camaraderie and success in their work together. The science is the science. The numbers are still going to, come out the way that they do from the data. But at the end of the day, they feel fulfilled in their work. They feel like they're really making an impact. And I think that's what we're all looking for to some extent in our work, right? Is to feel known, to feel seen, to feel valued, and then ultimately to feel like we're making an impact in the work that we do. Man, and I think, Abby, you have set such a great example. And even today's conversation has been really enlightening to me about some things that we need to take back to Thorough Group and, take a look at internally of just the way that we think about things, the way we value things, the way that we prioritize things. That has been really important for me to learn. I'm sure this is an episode I will go back and listen to multiple times to cover some of these topics. So I just want to say thank you for making the time to be with us today and to be with our audience. We will put some information about the book that Abby referenced earlier as well in the show notes, so that you'll be able to find that as well. And Abby, thank you again. This has been a really great conversation and great opportunity for us to think about how we can be better. And ultimately, as Darren mentioned here at Thoroughly Thriving and at the Thorough Group, we are really focused about working as one so that we can win as one. And we really feel like the information we've gotten today is going to help us do that. So thank you so much again for joining us today.
Yes, and thank you for the very thoughtful questions. I appreciate the time.
Thank you for joining us today for another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to share it with those in your world. If you'd like to learn more about the Thorough Group, please go to thoroughgroup.com. And remember that we will all remain thoroughly thriving if we continue to work as one and win as one.